So a little bit of background about SOHN. This is actually the second project from Christopher Taylor, who is actually hailing from South London, represent. He had a project called Trouble Over Tokyo, which I think was critically well received, but after releasing 4 albums under that moniker, he canceled it and came back and hit the scene as SOHN, which is a new solo project. He released his first album as SOHN in 2014. It was called Tremors, and he recently released his second album called Rennen in the year 2017. So my first impressions of this album was that it definitely hit on the sort of neo-blues sound, which is very popular nowadays, particularly a couple years ago. You know, we heard Hozier with his very, very popular song, Take Me to Church. And I got a couple of vibes from that on Rennen, particularly with some of the vocal things he did. And another artist that I drew some very clear parallels to was James Blake. So I know we talked briefly in a previous review about an album having a nice forward momentum, and that's always something that I've appreciated about SOHN over his singles, side projects, and 2 full-length releases. I've always thought that his production quality and his writing had a very good sense of motion. And as a dancer and a theater maker, that is important to me. And as I listened to this album, I didn't hear an immense amount of growth between the 2 releases, Tremors and Rennen, but where the growth was, I thought that it made a confident and more mature sounding release. So for me, some of the standout tracks were Conrad and Rennen. And I thought that it opened nicely with Hard Liquor. And it's interesting because I don't think I've ever considered him a particularly strong lyricist, but I do think that he uses his skills well.
Yeah, I am inclined to agree. I didn't hear a huge amount of development from the first album, but what is here is incredibly polished and interesting electronic music. As you say, that familiar sort of pop trope, the vocals over minimal electronics. This one really grabbed me. I think that it definitely loads up the strongest tracks at the front of the album. It falls back on a lot of sounds that are familiar, but it manages to present them in a way that is still interesting.
Yeah, I noticed that he is very good at flipping a lot of musical tropes, and I think that's well demonstrated on the final track, Harbor, which for the most part ends on a cliffhanger, which I thought definitely added a moodiness to the album. I know he is often characterized as sorrowful, but I do think that the highly produced techno undercurrents of the album subvert that a little bit in ways that make it interesting to listen to, and it doesn't get too drab.
No, I definitely found it to be a very reflective, contemplative listening experience, but I really liked that, and it was done really well. It was probably what I was looking for in Drake's views, was a similar kind of... Yeah, a similar kind of minimal self-examination or reflection. And I think that if we would put those 2 albums side by side, Drake and SOHN, I think that it really shows up the flaws in views for me. SOHN, lyrically, incredibly interesting and diverse range of viewpoints and takes, as you say, really evolved as a lyricist from the first album. Really
Absolutely.
Managed to extend it beyond a purely pop approach to lyricism.
Yes. Instead of writing lyrics to make them rhyme, he writes lyrics to, affect a certain intention. And I definitely heard that much, much better on this album. He was far more articulate.
Yeah, it's got a certain level of depth to it, which is just more exciting to listen to than you would reasonably expect.
And he is a producer, so I would only expect the best from him. But I have to definitely give him fair dues for knowing exactly where to put what. And I mean, he knew exactly when to back off with his vocals, and he knew exactly when to really rely on... He has a pretty good range, I think, vocally, and I think he knew when to employ that range, and then when to chill and let the instruments take over. So I heard some interesting things from this album. I definitely appreciated it. and I thought it was a lovely next step from Tremors, his debut.